everyone, Alexa Donne here, and today I am doing my winter thriller reading wrap-up. Though I'm not done, I have been binge reading thrillers since December, in part in preparation and kind of to push me through writing my own YA thriller. Reading these page turners really kind of keeps me in like the tonal suspense mode, which has really been helping me draft. Normally I can't read and draft at the same time, but this time I can. The point is, I basically started finally using my NetGalley account, and I've just been blowing through thrillers, both YA and adult. I've read a ton of them, and you guys are always asking me for recs. So you're gonna find out which of these I loved, which of these I was a little more lukewarm on, though I'll be honest, I've been pretty selective. I basically have been on NetGalley going, I think I'm gonna like this, and it's mostly been really stellar reading experiences, so the majority of these are going to be recs. There's also a metric crap ton of them, so I'm gonna try to be as brief and quick as possible running through these books. So let's start with Sadie by Courtney Summers. You've probably heard of Sadie. It's very, very buzzy. So this is a YA, though I would call it a nice little YA crossover, and it's basically like Serial meets YA. So part of the book is told from the perspective of a true crime podcast about Sadie, who has disappeared and gone missing, and the other half is in the past. It's Sadie's point of view of this journey that she goes on. The backstory is that Sadie's sister was murdered a year before Sadie hits the road. It's really tragic. Sadie's mom left a really long time ago, so Sadie was like a mom to her sister, really, really close, and then this horrible thing happens, and in her chapters, you know that she is trying to track down her killer because she's going to kill him, and then the podcast episodes, they don't know why Sadie left, why Sadie ran away, what happened to her, and all you know is that something bad did happen to her because this podcast is at a point where Sadie has also disappeared. It was a very, as I'll say for a lot of these books, very moody. I loved the gritty tone. It's grittier than a lot of YA books, and it does have that crossover feel because such a large chunk is from the POV of the podcast, which feels kind of like a more adult perspective. Sadie herself, complex. I wouldn't call her unlikable personally, but someone I know who also read it really hated her as a character, and it forced me to go, wait, I found Sadie relatable because she's flawed and imperfect. She has a lot of vulnerabilities, and it's all kind of built really beautifully on the page. She's a messy protagonist. You're following her and she's doing all the wrong things, but it's deeply compelling. The book had a lot of upsetting elements. I do want to offer a content warning that is a little bit spoilery, but I do think is important, so I will just flash like spoiler warning on the screen during this very short section. So the spoilery content warning is I do want to warn readers who are sensitive to mentions of and portrayals of child molestation that this book may potentially be triggering. But I found it to be a gritty and compelling, realistic tale. I loved the way that the podcast was worked in, and I gave Sadie 5 stars. Next, if you've seen my Which Kara Thomas Book Should You Read video, which I will link to down below, you'll know that I read 4 Kara Thomas books in December. I'd already read 2 of her titles previously, so in December, I started with The Darkest Corners. I'm not going to go into a lengthy summary of that since I do have everything in the Kara Thomas video, but long story short, girl returns to her hometown. 10 years ago, she and her friend were key witnesses in a serial killer's murder trial. He's been in jail, but then she goes home because her dad is dying. He is also in jail for something completely unrelated. And then a girl turns up dead, and it has the MO of the serial killer. And the question is, did they tell the truth? Is the right man in jail? And it goes from there. I think The Darkest Corners is my favorite Kara Thomas book. It's essentially a lot of the tropes that you see in adult thrillers, so the person who returns to their hometown and there's gritty stuff in their past and they have to investigate this murder to right wrongs, and they discover more and more dark secrets about their family, friends, past, the town, etc. It's all aged down to YA. I gave this 5 stars as well, and I do recommend it to you if what I just described sounds good. You like those tropes in thrillers. I thought it was very well executed. It had a nice twist ending. There were enough clues along the ways for you to piece it together, but the twist and then double twist, because it's kind of like it continues to twist on the twist. Very satisfying read. Generally, kind of the new Kara Thomas canon really pulls from kind of almost a rip from the headlines feel. You can very clearly tell she's inspired by kind of true crime stories, so it definitely has that feel. Next, I read the entire Prep School Confidential series by Kara Taylor, which was Kara Thomas's previous pen name. In brief, this is basically like Gossip Girl with some murder at a exclusive prep school. It's very popcorn, it's very soap opera. I tore through them, all 3 of them. As I mentioned in my Kara Taylor video, I gave the first 2 books 5 stars, I gave the third one 4 stars. The third one was a little less satisfying from like a mystery perspective compared to the first 2, but I recommend them if you are looking for soapier, popcorn, younger YA mystery murder thriller feel. Definitely less gritty, more kind of fun. Next is The Escape Room by Megan Golden. This is an adult thriller title that doesn't come out until August. This is when I started my NetGalley account and started reading pre-release books. This is one of my favorites of the adult thrillers that I read this winter. So the main action is 4 people who work at an investment banking firm go to an abandoned building. They're told to meet there because they have to complete a challenge before receiving their bonuses / raises / finding out who gets a promotion. So they end up in an elevator together in what they think is an escape room. It is not an escape room. You find out very, very early, so this is plot summary, not spoilers, that one of their former colleagues died a while ago, and essentially you as the reader know that they're there for a reason, and it's interspersed with chapters, first-person chapters from the perspective of the colleague who died. So the escape room elevator stuff is in the present, and then the past stuff, you get basically all of the backstory of this character starting at the firm, kind of getting to know her colleagues and all of kind of the drama and suspense and thriller stuff that went on. I burned through it. Some things I guessed, some things I didn't. I really cared about the main character, the woman in the past, and also one of the other, there's another character who worked on the team. Really cared about them. I cared what happened to them. There's a lot of high conflict tension because it's investment banking. So we see all those terrible assholes who bankrupted millions of people doing terrible things. And so it had a lot of kind of high stakes to it. I felt like I learned a lot about a world that I'm not super familiar with. And even I cared about the people in the elevator too. Even though you know they're terrible people and you know this cannot end well, it was really interesting. I liked the way that things unfolded, and I really see this book being a big adult thriller hit in the summer of 2019. So if that sounds up your alley, I do recommend buying this when it comes out. I liked the author's writing style enough that I went looking for other books. She's an Australian author, and her only other book was not released in the United States, and I'm super bummed. So I hope they release that as a backlist title, because I will buy it, because I really like the way that she constructed her thriller and built her characters. Next, I read A Danger to Herself and Others by Alyssa B. Scheinmel. This one just came out, though I read it about 6 weeks before publication. So this is a YA thriller. It's about a girl, and you know at the start that her roommate fell out of a window, that it was suspicious circumstances. She is in a coma, and the main character was sent to a mental institution for observation, rather than being arrested because she was the only person with her roommate at the time and they suspect foul play. So the character is not happy about being in an institution. They hate how she's told them she's a danger to herself and others. And you kind of get her experiences in the hospital as well as flashback chapters of kind of her and her friend before everything happened. It all happened at a summer study program. And this is one of the ones where you know from the back cover copy that there's a twist. I mean, all thrillers have twists, but it's the kind of one where you're basically told on the back cover copy that we have an unreliable narrator on our hands. So my takeaway on this book, I went in reading to outsmart the book. It's one of those books. And the catch with that is the answer that I came up with, I loved it so much, and that it wasn't the answer, that this definitely impacted my reading experience. I gave this a very healthy 4 out of 5 stars. I only knocked off a star because of my own expectations going into the reading experience. If you want to know my full thoughts and you don't care about spoilers, or you read it and then you want to know, I wrote a whole Goodreads review on this with a massive spoilers section where I talked about what I wanted the book to be, what I was convinced the book was and still think it should be, versus what it actually ends up being. Regardless of what it ends up being, still a really good reading experience. It had a lot of tension. I really cared about what was happening, even if I found the main character is definitely kind of unlikable, but she's still a protagonist that I wanted to follow because I wanted to know what had happened and what was going to happen. So that's kind of my non-spoilery thoughts about that one. Next, I read You Owe Me a Murder by Eileen Cook. This one comes out in a few weeks. So this one is basically it's also YA. A girl, she is going to a summer program in London with her ex. She signed up for it before he broke up with her, and he's a massive dick, and he's brought a new girlfriend on the trip, and he's really cruel to her at the airport while their flight is delayed and they're waiting for the flight. And a cool British chick who's her age sits down next to her, and they kind of strike up a conversation about like what a dick her ex is, and they become fast friends. They end up kind of getting drunk on the plane together and dishing about kind of the people who've hurt them. So the main character is going on about her dick ex who's on the flight and going on the trip, and the other girl's talking about someone who's wronged her. You know where this is going. It's not going anywhere good. And essentially, they're drunk, and the main character is like, they talk about what would happen if he died. Wouldn't it be so convenient if someone else got rid of him? You know this isn't good. So the main setup is they get to London and then he dies. And the main character realizes that the other girl killed him for her, and now she owes her a murder. It's all there in the title. The premise is there in the title. So this is a very tight, taut suspense book where you're with the main character and this other girl, Nikki, is stalking her, and basically she's like, you have to kill my mother. And I was stressed the whole time reading it. I loved the London setting, and it's one of those ones where you're so fully kind of in the perspective of the character, and like the complications and conflicts are so tightly wound because Nikki has proof that the main character wanted her ex dead because she wrote something down because she's an idiot. And you really feel as trapped as she does in terms of having to kill someone for this other person, or else she's gonna basically frame her for killing her ex. It's a whole thing. Really tense. I recommend it if you like that kind of YA thriller, or that kind of thriller period. It's less about like whodunit, because you know whodunit, you know that the other person is a bad person. It's more of the psychological suspense. And I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I read Happily and Madly by Alexis Bass. This is coming out from Tor in June. Also one of my favorites that I read. So I think I've read 15 to 20 books, and like I gave most of them 4 and 5 stars, but like, you know, when you get a little bit of like distance from books and hindsight and you realize which one's gonna rise to the top of your esteem, this is one of my favorites of the YAs that I read because it completely took me by surprise. So I downloaded it because it was in the mystery and thriller section, and I love the cover, and it sounded interesting to me. So it's a girl, her dad has remarried, so step family, and they're spending the summer in like the rich seaside town, and the main character is like, she's from Arizona and she's gotten in trouble with the law, and her mom sent her to spend the summer with her dad to kind of like clean up her act. It's one of those like wrong side of the tracks person ends up in the super swanky seaside town thing. It's like the Great Gatsby thing, seeing like rich assholes from the outside, and of course stuff is going on. But it really surprised me because it's not a typical thriller in the way that all of these other thrillers I read were. It's a very low-key, character-driven suspense novel. There's a thread of suspense through it, but it's really about the characters and the character relationships. I loved the relationship between the main character and her dad, and her stepfamily, his new wife, her stepsister. Her stepsister is one of my favorite parts, actually, because there's such an easy way, like it's easy to demonize the stepfamily, to demonize the stepmom, this is one of those situations where dad was cheating on mom and this is the other woman. It's so easy to demonize her stepsister, to make her awful, but all of the relationships between the women in the book, but particularly the main character and her stepsister and her stepmom, I thought it was really well considered and well done. It felt human, just super human. And what I loved especially, to give you a hint of what the suspense is, it's one of those ones where she meets a boy and they have chemistry. And then, of course, it turns out the boy isn't who he says he is. And there's romantic complications between the boy and the sister and the main character. So, content warning for cheating, ? Kind of. It's like Anna and the French Kiss style. So if that does bother you, you will have problems with this book. I didn't have a problem. I thought it was respectfully done. Especially because there's suspense reasons that things aren't as they seem. I won't go into more without spoilers, but it's very much like a Kate Cod, rich people lying suspense thriller. And I loved the writing specifically. I found it to be, I used the word languid in my review. This book was like a bubble bath that I wanted to like sink into and keep returning to. I loved the language. It was complex and purposeful without being flowery and ridiculous. I really enjoyed it. I liked the characters. I was super invested in who they were and what they were doing. And the suspense elements, like, it wasn't the most shocking suspense I've ever read, but I didn't care because I loved the world and I thought that the buildup of everything and kind of the twists were pretty well done. So one of my favorite reads. And Tor, if you're watching this, please buy more books from Elizas Bass. I would like to read more thrillers by her. Thank you. Next, I read The Stranger Inside by Laura Benedict. I went back to adult. This one, one of those classic claustrophobic thriller reads. And that's a good thing with a thriller. I felt so trapped alongside the main character. So essentially, this woman, she returns home from a 3-day kind of like self-care retreat. She went off to the lake for the weekend. She comes back to her home and someone's changed the locks. She finds a strange man in her home and she calls the cops, and he claims that she rented him the house and that he has a signed lease and he produces it. And so it starts off as like, there's a stranger in her house. Who is he? And the first kind of like, it's the question of, is someone impersonating me and did someone like legitimately lease him the house? But it very, very quickly, to the point that this isn't spoilers, devolves more into like, who is this man in her house? How does he know her? And why is he targeting her? And I was just so stressed reading this book, but in a good way. Again, it's one of those ones where it was vivid, despite being in third person. I love third person as a reader, but I've gotten very used to reading thrillers in first person, which often lends the best sense of immediacy. But this one, it was in third person, but I felt so close. And I should say, the main character, Kimber, you know that her sister died when she was a teenager. And you know this because a part of the structure is it is intercut with flashback chapters from her dead sister's point of view. So you know something went down with her sister. You know there's something with family secrets because it's about her sister. It's about her dad, who disappeared shortly after her sister died. So it's layered with those kind of breadcrumbs. And I felt Kimber is a very complicated character, because you have her point of view in this story and you feel for her because she's basically locked out of her home. She might lose everything by this psycho who's in her house. And he's very menacing. Some good stuff happens. But also, you know from the flashback chapters that when she was 14, she was an asshole. She was a huge bratty teenager, and her older sister, who you know dies, being in her perspective is very interesting because you get a different glimpse at who Kimber was as a teenager, a young teenager, and her relationship with their dad, and like, you know that there's stuff going on. And Kimber is really, honestly, she's a messy person. She's ruined her relationship. Like it ended very badly with her ex, who happens to be a lawyer and the only person who can help her in the situation. She has an ex-husband, who is, he and his new husband were two of my favorite characters, actually. They have a pretty good relationship. Probably the only people in Kimber's life who really like her. She's got problems at work. She is not a nice person. She's made some mistakes, and those come up with the people who try to help her. I can't say anything else without spoilers, except to say that if you're an adult thriller reader and you like the high concept sound of what I've described, of like the core premise, this, and feeling like totally in the head of the main character and like really invested in wanting them to get through this situation, and you like kind of, I'd call it's the Southern noir genre. It's very Gillian Flynn. If that sounds good to you, I recommend this book. I gave it 5 stars. Again, it's probably one of my favorite reads. Same situation where I would totally read a lot more books by the author. I did go look them up. She does have a catalog. Just really effective suspense thriller. Next, I read The Elizas by Sarah Shepard. Yes, Sarah Shepard. She of Pretty Little Liars fame. She wrote an adult thriller, and this one was a weird book. It was a very weird book, but that for me is kind of an endorsement. I liked that it was weird. So what you should know about this book is that it's super meta. It is about a young adult writer. Weird, right? No, it's about a young woman who wrote a novel, has sold her novel, and her novel comes out in a few months. She checks herself into a hotel at the very beginning and basically ends up, they think she threw herself in a pool, and she has a recent history of trying to drown herself for reasons which come in. And essentially she wakes up in the hospital and she insists that someone pushed her into the pool. And everyone's telling her that no, she's wrong. So it's kind of the gaslighting the main character suspense trope, where she's convinced, no, someone tried to kill her. And she has to figure out why. And so you have her perspective of trying to figure this out. And then you have excerpts from her debut novel coming out in a few months. And you as the reader are reading about the main character, Eliza, and what she's going through. And you're also reading her book. And you start to realize, again, this isn't spoilers, this isn't the back cover copy, her book has eerie similarities with her real life. Now, as we all know, authors write aspects of their real life into their debut novels, into their books, period. And so the question for you as the reader, I told you it was meta and it was weird, is how much of what ended up in her debut novel is true and how much of it is fiction? And if parts of it are true, could they explain some of the things that are happening to her now? Someone is trying to kill her, essentially. I ultimately gave this 4 stars, and I did have some reservations with it. I think this is a love-hate book. I fell on the side of, I was weirdly delighted by it. It goes into a pretty bonkers suspense noir direction. It gets real soapy, and I really enjoyed it. Some readers didn't. I looked at the reviews. Some readers really didn't like the book. I fall on the side of, it was weird and I liked it, but it's a love-hate one. So kind of, it depends on kind of your tolerance threshold for weird meta books. There was one particular thing I didn't like that I won't get into details about, but I did review it on my Goodreads account, and so you can look at it if you want. There was one thing with a particular character, I'll put it this way, I felt there was some nerd shaming in the book, and as a nerd, it's like the one character choice that I didn't really appreciate, but it's a quibble in an otherwise really enjoyable suspense thriller. I just kept tearing through it because I was like, what the hell is going on? And I really, really wanted to know what the hell was going on. And I mean, it's a good page turner. We're almost done, I promise. I read so many books. Next, I read The Favorite Daughter. Hard to review this one without spoilers. I'll start with the plot summary. Essentially, the main character is a woman whose daughter died a year ago. She fell off a cliff, and you don't know whether or not it was an accident or foul play. That's in the back cover copy. And she's been in mourning for the last year. And so the book starts when she's decided she's gonna pull herself out of her mourning cave and she's going to repair her relationship with her estranged husband, you know, because she's been grieving this whole year. She has acute grief, and her other daughter, her younger daughter, who is graduating from high school. The title alludes to the fact that her deceased daughter was her favorite. You know that there's weird family dynamics there, and the main thrust of the suspense plot of the novel is, how did Mary die? Was it foul play? And the mom becoming convinced that the cops didn't do their job, and kind of someone starts leaving her notes. Oh, you know, Betsy's lying. That's her remaining daughter, about what happened to Mary. And so you kind of have that suspense plot. It's literally impossible to talk about this book without mild spoilers. So I'm going to put a mild spoiler warning on the screen because this book wasn't what I expected it to be. That's a good and a bad thing. I expected it to be a very straightforward suspense thriller of this grieving mother finding out what happened to her daughter. That is not what this book is. What this book is, mild spoilers. Kind of. It's also major spoilers, but it's literally the premise of the book, though. The main character is a stone-cold, diagnosable narcissist. This became very clear to me very early in the book. I'm very attuned to personality disorders. I can usually spot a sociopath or a narcissist pretty quickly. Though I expect some readers of this book will be more surprised. They won't figure it out until much later, but I figured it out very early on. And so once I realized what the book actually was, I was along for the ride. And can I say, this is one of the best portrayals of a narcissist I've ever read. It was very well done. And I can tell you that being in the point of view of a stone cold narcissist is very uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable read, but not in a bad way. Like, she is awful. And so it becomes more of an unreliable narrator suspense book because you know she's lying about a lot, because narcissists lie a lot. She's a narcissist who's also a pathological liar. And so you as the reader are trying to piece together the truth about her relationship with her husband, what her younger daughter is actually like. But here's the thing, the husband and the daughter legit have secrets that have nothing to do with the wife's narcissism. But also something did happen to Mary. That suspense thread is real, but it's because the mother is an unreliable narrator. You can't trust most things she tells you about how she is as a mother, about how she is as a wife, about who her husband is, who her daughters are and were. It's a really interesting read. I think this book comes out in June. I think it's both going to do pretty well. It's got a great cover. I can see this landing pretty well in the adult thriller market, but I can also see a huge reader divide. I can see people loathing this book, or it could be the next Gillian Flynn. I don't know. And spoilers. So those are my thoughts there. I think I gave it a solid 4 stars because I ended up liking it for what it was. It just wasn't what I expected. Oh, and I should say the favorite daughter is by Kara Ruda, and it's coming out June 21st, 2019. Next, I read Our Little Secret by Kate Houlihan, and it's coming out in August, so another one that's not coming out for a while. I read this one. I think this was a 24-hour read for me. Like, I just burned right through it. It's a multi-POV book. One of the POVs is a police detective, and the other 2 POVs are 2 women who are going to a beach house for the week with a group of friends. It's like rich people from Manhattan going on a summer vacation. And on the first night, one of the wives is murdered. And so it jumps back and forth between after her murder and the events leading up to her murder from the perspectives of the 2 other wives and the police detective in the after investigating what happened. It was a really interesting read. I ended up giving it 5 stars because one of my favorite things about it actually is I love that the way the author describes things. I'm usually not a slut for purple prose, for pretty language, but I liked the way that she you know when you just like the way the words kind of feel in your mouth and the way they describe things like feelings and colors and settings? It was a very vivid read. Vivid, and also I felt very invested in the perspective and the emotions and the lives of each of the POV characters. The suspense elements were built pretty well. I was always wondering and guessing and analyzing. You're analyzing every single character because essentially every single person in the house is a suspect, even the POV characters, as well as, of course, their husbands. There's kind of secrets within the group going on. There's bigger stuff at play. And there's also the thread of the police detective. And this brings me to kind of the theme of the book and something that people are going to either love or hate. This book has a theme, and it really works on that theme. Because when you start the book in the perspective of the police detective, she's actually investigating a rape. And the broader theme of the book is horrible things that happen to women. Is the theme of the book. It's a book that has a theme. And all of the different POV characters and all of the characters, whether they're POV or not, kind of play into the theme. It's like horrible things that happen to women and the secrets that we keep and kind of the systemic things that don't protect women. And readers are going to love or hate it because in that sense, the police detective's perspective goes beyond the actual tight suspense thriller part. Like, it's not just about what's actually happened at the beach house. It's also about the rape case and kind of how that goes. And I kind of have mixed feelings about that approach, even though I get it. Regardless, sped through the book, fully invested, really enjoyed it. Of all the ones I read, it's definitely a standout to me. It was one of the better ones in terms of the way that the story was crafted. I thought it had good twists and turns. And I did give it 5 stars. Next is The Promise by Teresa Driscoll, and this is coming out March 7th from Amazon Books. It's an Amazon, one of their imprints. They do very well at adult thrillers. And when I started this book, I thought, it has a similar premise to The Lying Game, which you might know I hated. It's the one Ruth Ware book I didn't like. It didn't work for me because I felt like it didn't deliver on the premise that it was offering me, which was girls who went to boarding school together, harbor a dark secret about their time at school, and then catch up with them as adults. I really love that premise. And I have to say, this book didn't quite deliver on the premise either. The first 50%, I thought it was like, oh, this is what I wanted The Lying Game to be. It's going to be better. But then it kind of takes a turn a little past the halfway point into what I would term women's fiction, but a thriller. It's a domestic thriller. It's like women's fiction suspense. Here's the thing. If you love women's fiction and suspense, you're gonna love the book. It does it very, very well, but I was hoping it would be a little more murdery than it turned out to be because it's more rooted in domestic suspense. That said, it was well written. Again, this is a multi-POV one. It's Beth, one of the women from boarding school. It's the private investigator that she and her friend Sally hire to find their friend Carol. So they were all friends at boarding school. And you know something terrible happened. You know the terrible thing involved Carol, and that Carol basically married a dude, went off to France, and cut off all her friends. But the boarding school where they went is being sold and torn down, and they're worried that they're gonna dig up a body. You know there's a body. So like there was death. And they have to find Carol because they want to all confer on what they should do, which is like, should they go dig up the body? And Carol's POV is you're getting like journal entries of her in France. So there's a little distance there. It had some really good turns, definitely moments where I was like deeply compelled, like I cared about the characters and what happened to them. But ultimately, it was a 4-star read for me, and it's one that I really can only recommend if you like women's fiction and domestic suspense, because someone's gotta write that noir, murdery boarding school book for me. Please, I want it. Someone has to write it. Maybe I'll have to write it. Because like there's such promise in the premise, but yeah, it just is a good book, but didn't quite meet my expectations. And it also did this thing, it's like the one thing I did note in my review where I could tell that a journalist wrote it, because my one quibble, it does have flashback chapters, but the flashback chapters aren't immersive. They're narrated by the adult version of the character rather than fully dramatized from a teen perspective. That's one thing I do think The Lion Game did very well. My quibble with The Lion Game is that there weren't enough of the dramatized flashback YA chapters. So that's one note on this. It's very much rooted in the adult perspective and part of the story. Next, I read The First Mistake by Sadie Jones. I read this in less than a day. It was really good. One of the reasons I picked it, it's got a really sexy cover, but it was apparently her last book was a Reese Witherspoon book pick, and I know the person who picks those books and I trust her taste. So I was like, I bet this person is a good author. This one's coming out in July. I think it's going to blow up this summer. I think it's going to do incredibly well. So this one also, you go in knowing that there is a twist of sorts. So you know from the book description that the main character is happily married, that she's a widower, she loves her husband, but he starts acting strangely and she confides in her best friend, and the back cover copy basically says, but can she trust her best friend? So you know going in that something's wrong, right? So it's basically told in 3 sections with kind of different perspectives. The first part is Alice now. It's kind of something fishy is going on with her husband, and then she has her best friend Beth. Lots of Beths in these books I read, actually. And then part 2, because you know something's wrong with Beth, part 2 is from Beth's point of view 9 years earlier, because there's a bombshell dropped at the end of part 1 that connects someone that Alice loves to Beth. And then you get Beth's perspective of basically having an affair with this person 9 years ago. And then it builds to the third part where there's twists upon twists and things aren't what they seem. I really liked it. I had some quibbles with parts of it. There's one logic flaw in the twist that if you would like to be amused, I basically just wrote 3 full paragraphs in my Goodreads review of all the questions I have based on the twist. But I still gave it 5 stars. It was a really great reading experience. I was fully invested in the characters. I cared about all of them. Beth's section especially, because in part 1, you know Beth is up to something. She's acting fishy around her friend, and you know she's not all right. But then you read her flashback chapters and oh God, you're in her perspective. You feel for her and you know that this man is lying to her, and like you kind of understand why maybe she's mad. It was really good. It had some good twists. It wasn't exactly what I expected, and that's an endorsement. But yeah, the logic hole. It's gonna be but it's soapy and fun. So ultimately, does the logic hole matter? It matters a little bit to me. Because my one thing is that there are thrillers that have like a really satisfying denouement after the big explosion where you get to settle into the conclusion and it answers a lot of questions. And there's the ones that don't do that. And this is one of the ones that doesn't do that. And I do wish it had a little bit of that because I had so many freaking questions, but very, very good suspense thriller. And then last, but certainly not least, though kind of, is I read Dear Wife by Kimberly Bell. This book comes out in June. I never posted the video of my review of her last book because I was conflicted because I found it a little bit racist, and now I wish I had edited and posted that video. I have a lot of thoughts about this book, which I am not going to tell you in this video because what I am going to tell you is there were some things in this arc that I read that were really problematic. Header, what happens when you read a problematic book? I sent extensive feedback to the publisher about some specific things that if they're not changed before publication, wow, yeah. So my conclusion here, I gave the thriller part of this book 5 out of 5 stars. The thriller was immaculately written, so much better written than her last one, like from a craft perspective, had some really good characters, some really good twists, but I'll just say, my rating for representation is 1 star. So on Goodreads right now, I have it averaged out at a 3, and I do have the content warnings very vaguely in that review, so you know what my problems were and what I sent to the publisher. But I'm refraining from properly reviewing or talking about this book until the final book comes out, because I want to know if they make any changes. Because if they don't, well, I'll post my full review and I'll probably definitely drop my star rating down because the stuff that's in it is bad enough that, I mean, really shame on them. They should have caught it and they need to fix it. So that's kind of my thing on that book. I'm sorry to be so vague. Just out of respect to the publisher and the author, I want to give them the chance to fix it. Never expected myself to be in a situation where I would read a book and catch something really messy and problematic ahead of time. So that's where I am with that one. I'm still in my thriller kick. I'm still reading, so you'll get more thriller recs. I'm gonna keep reading them until I finish my book because this is helping me so far. So that's kind of the overview of my winter thriller reads. Let me know down below in the comments any questions you have, any thrillers you've been reading that you recommend. And I will also have down below in the description box links to all of these books with information on when they're coming out, since many of them won't be out for a while. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it, and I will try to make more bookish content on this channel. If you're not already subscribed, I post new videos 2 to 3 times a week. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and as always, happy reading!